The first question most people ask when thinking about building their dream home is what's the cost per square foot? And today we're going to cover the reasons why this can be one of the least useful questions to begin that process. My name's Jarrett and I live in Aledo. And today we're going to talk about why two homes with the same square footage can have dramatically different prices per square foot, and why thinking about your total project cost is going to be much more effective than thinking about your dollar per square foot. And to do that, we're going to cover the top 7 surprises that you're going to run into when building your custom home. If you're thinking about building a custom home in the Aledo area, reach out to me. Let's have a conversation. I'd love to help connect you with some of the best builders in the area and make sure that you know exactly what you're getting into as you're moving towards your dream home. Okay, well, let's jump straight into cost surprise number 1. And I'll be honest, this is the one that oftentimes works as the biggest filter for people deciding whether or not a custom home is the best fit for them. And that's going to be financing, carrying cost, and appraisal risk. So what does that all mean? Let's get into like the realities of this. But when you go full custom, you're going to be buying the lot yourself. You're going to be financing the lot yourself, and you're financing the cost of construction. And while you're doing that, you're paying interest the whole time on this construction loan from the bank. And then at the end of the day, when everything's said and done, you're having to come out of that into permanent financing. I'll have a separate video on how all the financing works. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty of this today, but if you're not prepared for cash outlay throughout the process and carrying the interest only payments that can go for a while, that's something you need to think about. This is not just a close at the end, put a down payment, and you're good to go. If that's the route you need to go, semi-custom is probably the right option for you, or a better option for you, because on the custom build I'm doing, if everything goes perfect and smooth, I'm looking at least $55,000 in interest only payments made throughout the process. And that monthly payment goes up at the end of the day when the home is basically done. At the very end, I'm looking at $6,500 to $7,000 a month in interest only until we come out of that into permanent financing, right? So that's something to think about. Now, separate from maybe the upfront cost of the land purchase and getting the financing originally, and then you've got the carrying cost at the very end. So I'm covering the front end and the back end right now. You do have potentially an appraisal risk, right? If you over customize, you make it a little too unique, you overbuild for the neighborhood, or you don't build the right thing for the neighborhood, there's a potential that your home doesn't appraise properly. So maybe you originally, based on everything, you thought you were going to, be bringing X amount to the closing table to go into permanent financing. There's a possibility if the appraiser has trouble meeting the value that was expected, you might need to bring excess cash to the table. So that's something to think about. Like I said, this is the primary reason that, people who come in asking and thinking about custom homes, if they choose not to go custom, this is oftentimes the biggest reason for them. And once you get past this, there's still a bunch more surprises to come. Okay, now cost surprise number 2 is going to be buying the land. And I don't mean that the price of the land is the surprise, because that's actually probably the most transparent and the easiest dollar amount to understand, but it's how does the land purchase itself fit into your overall budget? And this is one that can vary wildly depending on where you're buying and like how much land you're buying. There are some general rule of thumbs that are considered best practice. So if you are looking at a semi-custom home or you're talking with a builder who buys land and builds spec homes or builds infill lots, or they build their own home to sell it, a lot of times they're making a general rule of thumb that they want the land itself, to be no more than maybe 20% of the overall project cost, right? The value at the very end of the day. So that's something to think about, right? If that's what the builders do, maybe that's a good practice for you to try to emulate. On custom homes, that's not always going to be the case. Custom homes, maybe you're buying in a neighborhood an area where land is very expensive. Aledo is one of those places. So with custom homes, it's possible for your land cost to maybe get closer to 25 or 30% on the high end. You probably want to avoid that if possible, but that's just something to consider. But if you're buying acreage, if you're buying 5 or 10 acres, especially in a expensive area where land's expensive. I mean, it just totally changes the formula. So you just need to make sure, really what you're doing is you're making sure that the land cost in the neighborhood roughly aligns with an appropriate valuation of the home you're planning to build. Maybe your land cost works if you're going to build a 4,000 or 4,500 square foot home. Maybe it doesn't work if you're building a 3,500 square foot home or a 3,000 square foot home. So that's something that you need to think about in advance, because that's a major issue. That's an appraisal breaking issue if you don't plan this appropriately. And then on the other end of the spectrum, one, if you don't build a big enough home, that's an issue. And then two, if you build a home that is too big for the slot and the price and everything else, that could be an issue as well. And if you are looking at buying land in Aledo, reach out. I also will have another video on how to identify land in Aledo for that custom build that's not already out. It'll be out very soon. It's part of my original series of how to build a custom home in the Aledo area. So that's something to look at and think about, and reach out if you have questions. Okay, so you've got your land and now you're ready to design your house, but not quite. Now you're going to be looking at your site prep and your utilities. I'm kind of lump these together. And there's some areas in this that can really be surprising, especially if you're not building inside city limits with city provided utilities. So first off, well and septics. There are, depending on where you're building, wells can range significantly in cost. And you've got septic systems. And if you're that far out in the country, you're probably going to have propane as well. Propane and septic aren't going to be enormous costs, but you want to make sure that the builder is including that in the budget for you. Next, you're going to have grading and site drainage. And depending on the slope of the lot and how angled and like where water runoff is going to be, that can be a pretty decent chunk of change as well. So that's really, it was the first thing that was done. I closed on my property, and like within 2 days, there's a bulldozer out there scraping dirt, moving it around, getting it flat, and prepping that home site. And then you've got stuff like related to drainage. It's like, I had a client looking at some land, and, it was like a big parcel, it was like 5 or 6 acres, but there was like a big drainage easement that ran along the edge of the road. So they weren't going to be able to just do a simple driveway with a small little like hole for the water to flow through. They were going to have to do like a full on engineered culvert that would have to be approved that it didn't mess up site drainage, right? And then you've got, okay, depending on how sloped your property is and like where the home's going to be and where it's going to sit, you might have retaining walls. Retaining walls can be fairly expensive as well. So this is another area where an excellent lot might have minimal site prep costs, but maybe you found, a beautiful neighborhood, lots of rolling hills. It's amazing. Maybe you're on the top of a hill or close to that. You've got some amazing views, but with some of that beauty is going to come some extra site prep work that you need to make sure is budgeted into what you're doing. And that's part of the conversation early, is making sure maybe a builder gets eyes on this land that you just bought to make sure that there's no major surprises. Now, one last example in this, talking about wells. Depending on where you are, a well might cost $30,000 or $40,000. Or it could cost $80,000. Or you could be in an area where there's the real potential that they might have to drill 2 or 3 times to hit water so you have a functioning well. So that's something to be aware of. Hopefully it's accounted for in contingencies, or you have a strong understanding of who you're working with and making sure they know what they're doing. Okay, cost surprise number 4. I'm going to say this is your outdoor living and your flat work. And this is one that can really be a big line item on your budget, because none of this is included in your square footage when you're thinking about price per square foot. So every single square foot of this stuff is not included in square footage when you count square footage, but does increase your price per square foot. So this is the big one to make sure your builder and your architect understand of what you're looking for, because your back porches, your outdoor living spaces, your kitchen back there, how many garage bays? I'm going to include garage bays, so non-air conditioned space of the house. If you want a porte-cochere, you want a circle drive, you want a motor court, just your normal driveway, right? You want a circle drive. All of that stuff, there's a pretty significant cost attached to it. And so, for example, on my property that I'm building, there's a 50-foot setback in the neighborhood we're building. Most people build pretty close to that setback, so they get the most lot usage possible. I have one of the lots that's a little bit longer, so there's a lot more backyard space. And I wasn't thinking about this when we were doing our initial budgeting. And so this was a little bit of a surprise to me, was when we actually get out there to start doing site prep and, hey, where are we going to put the home? We realized that we already have a neighbor that's a completed home. I mean, we knew the home was there, but we hadn't thought about this part of it. He wasn't at the 50-foot setback. He was 100 feet back. And then we have a neighbor on the other side of us that's also set back approximately equivalent to that guy. So it would look really weird for us to build our home at the 50-foot setback and be 50 feet in front of the other homes. On top of that, it would just kill the privacy in the backyard because they're going to just look forward into our backyard. Okay, so now we're putting our home back to visually and to be lined up with these other homes. Well, 100 is about twice the distance as 50, right? Anybody who's a math major. So that's going to significantly impact our flat work budget, right? That basically doubled the cost of our driveway, just the driveway itself. And we want a circle drive. So now even the circle drive is adding additional cost because of the length the circle drive has to be to get further back. So those are some like real world examples. None of that stuff goes into like your living space or anything else, like your calculations. And so, for example, I think our circle drive we want to add is going to run $8,000 to $10,000 on top of the driveway itself. So just adding the circle drive, $8,000 to $10,000, which is going to add almost $2 per square foot to the cost of the house that we're building. So that's an example of how there's things that you might not initially think about can increase the cost per square foot. And if your builder doesn't know this, that this is your expectation going into it, they're not going to be accounting for it. And so like a lot of other areas, especially design selections, you start doing this and you start doing that, and you want to add a few more feet to the back porch, and you want to widen the driveway, and you want to add a circle drive, and you can really start increasing the cost of your property. And unfortunately, you're not necessarily increasing, what it might be able to appraise for. Okay, we're at cost surprise number 5, and we're still not inside the house yet. And we're going to touch on landscaping. And while this might not be the biggest budget line item that you're going to have, you're still going to be in the 5-digit range, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 probably at least. And you could go well above that. But your landscaping budget can be significantly impacted by your lot selection, your lot layout, your lot size, what's surrounding you. For example, a lot of people would really enjoy having a corner lot, especially one that like faces the drive-in. And that can be a beautiful setup for a home. But when you do that, you now no longer have just a front landscaping to take care of. You have a side landscaping that you need to do as well, because that's also like public street facing. A very wide lot could require additional work to do, because on these more rural properties, you're on 2-3 acres, you're not going to sod and you're not going to put a sprinkler system in the entire 2-3-4 acres. Most likely. Some people might. That's really going to add up though. So what you're doing is you're kind of typically doing the front yard and then whatever part of the backyard space that you're going to be utilizing immediately. So that can make an impact. I have for the neighborhood I'm building in La Madera, I have one of the narrower lot. I like this. It's narrow, it's long, it backs up to Moncrief Ranch. It's 2.6 acres. So a narrow lot in La Madera is still like 200 feet wide. That's still really wide, but it's not 300 feet wide, where you have like 300 feet of frontage road on you, and you're having to either do a whole bunch of frontage road, or you have part of your front yard space that's not maintained and looks like the rest of it. So that's something to think about. Like I said, corner lots, fencing, right? So the fencing that you need can be impacted by lot shape, your orientation, your location, all that stuff can really come into play. And just like I mentioned a minute ago, when it comes to how far your home is set back, right? That's, the further back you are, the more sodding and irrigation zones that you're gonna have to take care of as you are, moving stuff around and getting it installed. That can add up as well. Okay, now cost surprise number 6 is going to be how the structural design of the home can impact cost. And there's a bunch of reasons it could do this. One, the exact same square footage of 2 different homes could have different construction costs, because one might be single story and one might be 2-story. That's going to have some level of impact, maybe not enormous, but some. Then you're going to get to, okay, does it require any long expanses, any structural beams or additional structural beams? Steel beams can come into material cost. Do you want lots of arches, right? That's going to, more labor costs. Do you want specialty shaped, custom shaped windows. That's going to increase your window cost. Do you have like long hallways? You really might be getting the same number of usable spaces, but if you have long hallways or you have wasted square footage or you have rooms that are larger than they actually need to be, maybe you're just overbuilding a little bit, right? On that structural size. One of the things that I did on my build is I took that floor plan my builder had. And if you want more info on like semi-custom versus custom, I'm kind of doing this weird combo of kind of meshing the two. There was a couple of rooms that I just thought were a smidge small, right? So I wanted all the bedrooms to be a minimum 14 by 14. All the guest bedrooms, all the kids' bedrooms, minimum 14 by 14. I felt like, whatever size it was just a smidge small, right? Am I overdoing it? Maybe a little bit, but I don't ever want, a room on a home like this to feel too small. So that's one thing. Are you doing complex roof lines, like lots of transitions? Are you doing like a sloped roof line where it curves? That's going to add cost to it. Glass is super expensive. So do you have any like large glass walls? Do you have big sliding glass doors? Do you have, maybe like big steel frames that are being used? So that's all things that can really add cost. And that's just when it comes to like the structural design of the home. And this isn't even talking about selections, which is coming up next. Okay, now the last surprise, cost surprise, number 7, probably the least surprising surprise, is going to be your selections and your finish level. So this is where you get to where you're picking your flooring type, your cabinetry type, your countertops, your backsplash. Your plumbing fixtures can be incredibly expensive, your light fixtures. And so this is the area that people are oftentimes most excited about, and probably the area that most people can blow the budget as well. Because it's not just about material cost, sometimes it's about the installation of that material, right? If you're going with a chevron or a herringbone, or you're going with, wood crisscrossed with tile, some of these types of installs can have a significantly higher labor cost. So could be the labor, but honestly, you could have one material that might be twice as expensive as another material. And not just the material level of where you're installing it, but when it comes to that design. The designer we are working with is amazing. She has a ton of experience. And, we were talking with her. She's a personal friend. It was like, hey, we love your style. And she laughed and she said, well, it's because I pick really expensive stuff. And she can because of her clientele. She's worked with a lot of very wealthy families in the Colonial area, near the Colonial Country Club in Fort Worth. And she's right. I mean, she's got a great style. And with great style, oftentimes comes those costs. So one of the things that we were looking at that we probably are going to dial back on is like the ceiling of the game room, right? We want some level of texture in there, some level of interest, visual interest, rather than just a bunch of, white walls. And so, okay, well, maybe beams. Beams are great. Well, what about some like plank ceiling under the beams? Beautiful. The option is amazing. The problem is for a nice high-end home, that's essentially the same thing as putting wood flooring in your kitchen, right? So is putting tongue and groove plank on the ceiling of the game room worth another $8,000 to $10,000 just in material cost? It may or may not be. We're going to have to make that decision on, okay, is it worth it for us? And so that's something for you to think about, because one or two of those decisions are fine, but you start making a decision like that in every single room, and you're quickly adding 30, 40, 50, 60, $100,000 worth of kind of design upgrades that may or may not bring a full ROI on the build you're making. Okay, so why might builders be giving you significantly different estimates? Now, I'll be honest, most of the good builders are probably going to avoid giving you any level of precise estimate until they've figured out with you all of the answers to the prior, surprises that we've talked about. But sometimes they're still willing to give you ballparks, right? So why might these ballparks be wildly different occasionally? And it's going to come down to maybe the difference in the standard process of what they do unless you do something different. So this is kind of what I'm seeing. There's a lot of builders who they call themselves custom builders, and they will do custom homes. But they also build a lot of specs, or they build a lot of semi-custom stuff, which we've talked about. So go check out the other video if you need to figure out the difference between custom and semi-custom, or what's right for you. But they may be giving you estimates based on assumptions of what they normally build, even though they're willing to do whatever you want, right? So that's going to be, maybe an extra mistake is not confirming what their estimate's based on, because there's a whole lot of things they need to know if it's different than what they normally or traditionally do, right? Standard construction materials, okay? Window packages, appliance packages, cabinetry quality. You've got, your exterior construction materials. You've got what roof type. So I gave you a bunch of general examples, but okay, that turns into an asphalt roof, a tile roof, a metal roof. What's their standard, right? Window packages. Is it like Anderson? Is it Pella? Are they going like some custom, wood windows that you want? Wildly different, right? On the framing, right? Are they doing all 2x6 exterior framing, or are they doing 2x4s where they can get away with it? What about insulation? What's their standard process for insulation and what they're doing? All the cabinetry in the house, right? Is it paint grade or stain grade, right? Do you want that super smooth finish for the stained stuff? You've got so many things that they might have a standard process on all the specs they normally do, and they might be giving you some general expectations for their normal build quality, and you might have significantly different expectations, right? Maybe you're not looking for just like Viking or Sub-Zero. Maybe you're looking for I don't know, this is an example that'll probably come up in a bunch of videos, but like that specialty Italian stove that I'll never remember the name of, right? That's 2 times the cost of whatever else is out there. Maybe you want some high-end product on the exterior of your home. The reason you're going to get different estimates from different builders is primarily because you haven't given them your entire selection process yet, and their specific standards of what they typically build at, unless otherwise requested, could be significantly different. That's important to know. And if you don't even know where to start on how to pick a builder, I do have a video coming for you that will be helping you pick the best builder for you. Okay, so how do custom home budgets actually come into fruition, right? And don't take this section as complete gospel that it can't be changed, because all builders might work a little bit differently. But I'm going to break it down into approximately 4 stages. And the first stage is just a conceptual design based on square footage and layout, right? So again, square footage does matter. It's just not the end all be all of, because you're gonna have other stuff. So you got to have some conceptual design. You got to understand the neighborhood you're looking at and rough values. Okay, you got step 1. Hey, am I anywhere in the ballpark based on some initial checkboxes? From there, you should start having some conversations with builders to figure out if what your end goal is, maybe rather than like the overall ballpark, maybe making sure you're in the playing field, right? Okay, get some rough estimates, some wide ranges, some upper end expectations of where you might end up. If all of that, you're still, okay, boxes are still checked, that's stage 2. Now you're gonna move probably to the actual like architectural and then your design process, because okay, what kind of design do you want for the home architecturally, right? Size, shape, layout, all this other stuff. All this is going to be needed. I would say that design, or you probably want some level of design input here. I'm not saying every single selection made, but where do you want built-ins, right? Just that level. Where do you want the built-ins? What type of wood might you be looking at? What about the layout from a designer perspective, not just an architectural perspective, do you need? So stage 3, like you're starting to kind of hone this down and narrow it down, but you're not in the nitty gritty. You're not in the exact backsplash. You're not in getting into the exact, countertops, quartzite, quartz, marble, stone, whatever else. But that's stage 3. And so here's what you're doing. You're like, okay, my target's here. I don't have enough info. So you start out making sure that, okay, I'm here, and then I'm here, and now I'm here. And then you get into stage 4 is where I would say you get into kind of the final pricing and selections. Maybe you're actually meeting with builders and their design team, saying, okay, we've got an idea on the architectural, the layout, the structure, the lot. We've got all this stuff. Now, what am I actually putting in the home? That's when you're getting into window type and style, the type of cabinets, the countertops, the floors, the transitions, the plumbing fixtures, the light fixtures, all that stuff that, there's some significant cost difference in these materials sometimes, but you're not really going to get a firm budget until you get to stage 4. So what you need to do is make sure you're working towards stage 4, but in a way that makes sense, not getting too far into the weeds too early, because that's just going to derail the conversations and not be the most helpful. So again, until you get to stage 4, you probably shouldn't have any level of expectation of a single firm price, but you do want to continually make sure the trajectory you're headed is all within budget. Okay, now you know a lot of the costs, you know, most of the mistakes people make. So how do you set a realistic budget? And you start off by just understanding your total project cost. And honestly, a lot goes into that, a lot more than most people think. So you need to be talking with the builders early. You need to be talking with trusted professionals, architects, designers, and you need to make sure you get your full budget ready to go. And you do that by making sure all of your like designs and your selections and the neighborhood you buy in and the lot you're looking at all align with that expected budget. And now I'll be honest, I've had clients come in fully set on going full custom. And after doing a lot of this research, what they realize is that maybe they're not in the right life stage for a full custom. Maybe this next home they're buying is not their forever dream home. And sometimes they will actually move towards a semi-custom option because of the certainty, the guardrails we've talked about in other videos, and it's just going to align better with what their price and their budget allows, and maybe the bandwidth for what they're able to handle right now. So neither option's right, neither option's wrong, but that does happen, that sometimes people will realize that a full custom, it's not the right time. And so they're going to use a different home as a stepping stone towards that dream home in the future. Okay, so now that you figured out how to set your budget, let's cover some of the most common mistakes that custom home buyers make before we wrap this up. And I think number one is an over focus on the price per square foot. I just think it's not the most useful way to start the conversation with the builders. I think number two is ignoring the site prep costs, particularly when you're buying outside city limits and you have a larger lot, you're gonna have your own utilities, your own well and septic. I think that's a big mistake because that can have a material impact on your overall cost. And then underestimating the impact of the outdoor living spaces and or your garage, right? So you might think, hey, I want an oversized 3-car garage, maybe I want a 4-car garage, I want a big outdoor kitchen, I want a big outdoor living space. All that stuff is really going to add to the cost of your home, but it's not typically included in the square footage. So it will inflate your dollars per square foot on your build cost. And then finally, it's changing things mid-build and not sticking to your original plan. That is going to be one of the fastest and easiest ways custom home buyers are going to be able to blow their budget or get out of budget once they've already started and they have that plan, is by not sticking to it. So at the end of the day, it's important to remember that building a custom home is not just about the home itself. It's important to keep the full scope of the project in mind when you're thinking about your budget, your plans, and what's best fit for your family. And if this is something you're considering, whether you are relocating from out of state or you're just looking to move into your dream home in the Aledo area, reach out to me. Let's get that conversation started. Let me help connect you with some of the best builders in the area to make sure that there are no hidden surprises for you when building your dream home.